Good evening, everybody. This is Henry Garrido, the Executive Director of DC 37. Thank you so much for your participation today. Today, we are honored to have many of the mayoral candidates, almost all of them, so far to participate tonight. We thank them for what they've done. We thank them for the leadership. We'd like to thank them and for honoring the city workers and participating tonight. I would like to start this forum officially, the mayoral forum, mayoral candidates, so that the membership, the leadership can hear directly from the candidates themselves. A little bit about our union. DC 37 represents, is the largest municipal employee union probably in the country, representing 150,000 proud members, over 100,000 retirees and their families. We are unique in that we provide healthcare coverage, unlike most unions, to the members and to their beneficiaries until the day that they die. And that's pretty unique and pretty awesome. We're very proud of the fact that we don't relinquish that responsibility to the insurance companies. We do it ourselves. So we provide prescription drugs, healthcare, legal benefits, and other supplementary benefits directly to the members. So we're proud of that. Um, we represent, as we like to see, from architects to zookeeper. You know, people think about teachers and police officers and firefighters and first responders and such, and they deserve the credit. But we are also just as important. We represent 911 operators and EMS workers and school aides and school crossing guards and almost 30,000 hospital workers. Many of them, most of our members, over 100,000 out of the 150 were deemed essential employees. And as such, they were on the forefront of the delivering services to pandemic, not unlike after September 11, after the terrorist attack, the most horrific attack here in the city, where our members were the first one running towards the pit to save the New Yorkers, as many of people were running away from it. And we honor them and we honor the service. We have the unfortunate distinction that we lost more members than any other city unions. By our count, we lost 153 members who died from COVID. Many of them respiratory therapists and hospital workers, people that were first responders. But we also lost a lot of social service employees who were providing services, school food service employees who were feeding the hungry throughout and continue to feed the hungry throughout this pandemic. We honor their sacrifices. We fight like hell for them and for the families, but we want to also recognize them for the work that they do and they continue to do every day. So for those of you who have been fighting for Fund the Frontline at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, we thank you. We thank you for the sacrifices you made, for those of you who have service, and only to be also hit with the potential layoff of 22,000 city workers. I thought it was one of the most unconscionable things that I have ever seen, for those who sacrificed and were called heroes, and then a minute later were the ones who were put at risk. I will say that, but you didn't come here to hear from me. You came here from these folks. So let me turn it over to our panelists, our hosts today, our masters of ceremony, starting with Jamila Edwards, our associate director, and Donald Nesbitt, who will then take it from here. Thank you, everybody. I'll stay here. Looking forward to your comments, to your responses, to your questions, and to the responses to those questions. Thank you, Ben, again, for being here.
Thank you, Henry. So as Henry mentioned, my name is Jamila Edwards. I'm the Associate Director for the Council. I'm just going to go over some ground rules very quickly. Candidates will be asked pre-submitted and live questions from DC 30 members. You'll have 2 minutes to respond, and we just ask that you wait to be recognized by the moderator before speaking. You'll be allowed a 1-minute closing statement. Please feel free to use that time to answer any unanswered questions. Please be respectful and don't interrupt or talk over one another. Please be mindful of the time and length of your response. And we're going to start with opening remarks from each candidate in alphabetical order by last name. So up first is Eric Adams. Eric Adams spent 22 years as a police officer in the NYPD. 4 terms as New York State Senator, and he has served as Brooklyn Borough President for the past 7 years. Eric, the floor is yours. Please give your opening remarks.
Thank you so much. And people say that competency is on the menu. I believe it's on the ballot. I believe character is. And character, when I say character, I talk about Dorothy. She was a full service worker, worked long hours during the day, and at night went to clean other people's homes. Her pay was low. Whatever food she fed the children in Amstead Daycare Center, her children at home would also eat the same meal because she would take those leftovers. That is the life she lived, and that was my mom. When I fought hard to deal with the members of DC 37, I didn't do it because it was something that I saw as just a union. I saw it as my mother. That is why when COVID hit this city, I went and responded immediately to those mothers and sons and daughters who were feeding children every day in the schools, yet they didn't have PPEs. And I was proud to walk with Shaun, the president of that union. I went to the streets and handed out PPEs to the young people who were school crossing guards, who lost time off merely because the city did not acknowledge the importance of them. I know what it is to have gone to some of the juvenile detention centers and how your members were threatened. If they would have put on masks, they would have been brought up on charges. I don't see you as members of a union. I see you as members of a family that took care of my family when I was a child, and I'm committed to take care of your family and your members. We will not balance the back of this city's failure to run correctly on your membership. To all those mothers out there who are paid less, do more, and are committed to the city, I'm going to be a person that listens, stands with you, and fight for you. Thank you.
Thank you. One question. I'm sorry, you mentioned President Francois. I was negligent in introducing my partner, President of District Council 37, Shaun D. Francois, is the first also president of one of our largest local 372. Shaun is here with us, so we want to thank him for participating and honor him for his leadership as well. So thank you for reminding me, Eric. I apologize, I missed that on the introduction. So Donald?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out with us. As mentioned, my name is Donald Nesbitt. I'm Vice President to DC 37 and also the Political Action Chair, DC 37. And as mentioned by our Executive Director, an activist and an advocate for the people. Next up, we have Shaun Donovan. Shaun Donovan served as both Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and Director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget under the Obama administration. Shaun, your 2 minutes, you have your 2 minutes now. You have the floor.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Henry. Thank you to the more than 1,000 members that are on tonight. And I just want to begin by saying thank you. We have learned what the word essential means for workers this year. You are the heroes of this pandemic and the heroes of our recovery to come. So thank you for what you do every single day in this city we all love. I'm a public servant because I grew up in this city at a different time of crisis. As a child, I saw homelessness exploding around me. I saw neighborhoods like the South Bronx and Central Brooklyn crumbling and literally burning to the ground. And it lit a fire in me to go to work on behalf of this city that I love. I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in school. I came back after I finished school to work at a nonprofit, rebuilding those very same neighborhoods I'd seen burning as a kid. Through all of that crisis, I learned what it means to lead through crisis. That's why when I was housing commissioner in this city, I worked with Henry side by side to create the Municipal Employee Housing Program, with Mike Fishman to ensure that for the first time ever, we paid workers in affordable housing a prevailing wage, first time that had ever been done. And under President Obama, I led the effort to make partners with unions across this country to create family sustaining jobs, healthcare, and benefits. It's also why I'm leading the campaign of ideas every week, putting out another comprehensive plan for how we are going to not just repair and rebuild this city, but to reimagine it as a city that works for everyone. Just this past week, my jobs plan would create 500,000 jobs, a paid apprenticeship for every public high school student. Under our ranked choice voting system, the candidate with the biggest, boldest ideas, who goes to every neighborhood with a solution, will win this race. That's the campaign that I'm running. And that's the partner that I want to be with all of you to repair, rebuild, and reimagine this as a city that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaun. Up next is Kathryn Garcia. Ms. Garcia served as CEO of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Sanitation, and Interim Chief of the New York City Housing Authority. Ms. Garcia, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I went to public school. I was raised in a multiracial family because the top 3 of us were adopted of the 5 of us. I have seen what this city has gone through in the 70s and 80s when you didn't take the subway after 8 o'clock at night, and we can't turn back to that. I actually know many of you from my years of working in city government and working in partnership with labor. That is why I have endorsements from the Department of Sanitation unions that represent over 90% of the employees there, whether or not that's sanitation workers or auto mechanics or supervisors. They know that I am fair with labor and that I come to the table to work with them. I know that layoffs don't work, that it actually almost always ends up costing us more money because then you're going to have to fill in what you need to do with people on overtime. I know how essential workers are, whether or not during the summer that was sanitation workers, or my experience with school food workers who came through and were delivering and distributing 500,000 meals every single day. I went out to say thank you to them because I knew how important what they were doing was to people who were hungry. All of your work is imperative for the city to keep functioning. People who have unionized jobs have an ability to get into the middle class, to be able to know that during a pandemic, you have health insurance. We have to maintain that moving forward. I am committed to doing that. I've been doing it for the last 14 years, whether or not that was sewage treatment workers or construction laborers or sanitation workers. I have been there at the table, working together with labor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next up, we have Ray McGuire. Ray McGuire has spent the past 13 years as head of a global corporate and investment banking at Citigroup. Brother McGuire, you have the floor.
Oh, you're on mute, Mr. McGuire.
Sorry, I apologize. Thank you, Donald and Jamila and Shaun and Henry. My name is Ray McGuire, and I'm running for mayor because I have what it takes to lead our city out of the economic crisis, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic and by the wretchedness of COVID. The impact on all of our communities, but especially communities of color, Black and brown, has been devastating. I know what those communities are like. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, raised by my single mother, who was a social worker. I didn't know my dad. And my mother, along with my grandparents, raised me and my 2 brothers in a home that had at any point in time half a dozen foster children. And on that social worker's salary, she sometimes had to debate whether or not she was going to put food on the table or pay the gas and electric bill, or whether or not she was going to put tithes in the church plate. So I know what it's like not to have. I know what it's like to wash tin foil, and I know what it's like to put those small bars of soap together to convince yourself that you have a larger bar of soap. So I know what it's like, and I know what her sacrifices allowed me to do. And her sacrifices allowed me to get an education, to go from our home where I had to go 3/4 of a mile to a mile to get bused to a school that was in the suburbs to get the education, which allowed me in the 11th grade to do what my teacher asked to do, and that is to go test yourself against the big boys and girls in the East. And I had 16 years old. I went around New England on a Greyhound bus looking for school. And I was able to do that and go on to Harvard and Harvard College and Harvard Law School. And I came to New York with three things. I had a good education, I had a lot of debt, and I had no money. And this city has been good to me. It's where I met my lovely wife, and we're raising our three children. But right now, this city has gone through a crisis. It's a crisis of COVID, it's a crisis of the economy, and it's a crisis of the segregation that exists in our city. So my plan is to make sure that we address that. I have the lived experiences, what I've been doing in 40 years in business, which is making certain that I extend a ladder to others and having a solution that deals with jobs in the economy, where labor will be at the table, safety, security, and quality of life, and education. And that's why I'm running for mayor of this great city. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ray. Up next is Carlos Menchaca. Carlos Menchaca is currently serving as New York City Council member for the 38th Council District, which is in Brooklyn. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jamila and Shaun and Donald and Henry. Buenas noches. I'm Carlos Menchaca, City Council member and part of a City Council for the last 7 years that has been fighting with DC 37 to bring you incredible justice. And we can't stop there. I'm the candidate that has the experience, the energy, and the vision that we need for our working families. My story is a story of growing up with an incredible mother, a single mom, 7 kids. We grew up in public housing, and we learned a lot about government because we needed it to survive. I went to college, the first in my family to go to college, and now I'm here in New York fighting for families that look like mine. I have been the chair of the immigration committee and really working to figure out how we bring justice to immigrants. And I want to do that for everybody here in the city of New York. One of the things that I am working on right now is a piece of legislation that will bring universal basic income, a guaranteed income for working families. Many of those families that do not have the ability to bring that stimulus that Biden is going to be working on, we have to take care of our essential workers. Many of them, and Henry talked about them, have died. And we have to honor that history in our city as an immigrant city. And so those are the kind of policies I'm going to be pushing. And so we have to talk about the fact that the city cannot lay off any more workers, that we have to put a moratorium on that. But we also have to bring infrastructure. And so I want to bring hundreds of projects that are at the billions of dollars in our capital budget to actually invest in municipal broadband and other Green New Deal projects. Those are the kind of things that I know how to do because I've been doing them in the city council, passing good laws, negotiating good budgets, and that's the mayor that we're going to need. I'm ready to work with you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, we have Dianne Morales. Dianne Morales has spent many years in a nonprofit leadership space and most recently served as director and CEO of the social services nonprofit Flips Neighborhood. Diana, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Donald. Thank you all for having me tonight. I am excited to be in conversation with my former DC 37 family, where I worked in health and securities under Cynthia Chin Marshall while I was a graduate student at Columbia University. I'm a first generation Black Latina. I was born in Bed-Stuy to a working class union family. I am also the single mother of 2 children who I raised in the same neighborhood while navigating New York City systems to raise them on my own. It's not lost on me that just last week, we were celebrating the legacy of MLK, even as I joined our Teamsters in the Bronx, fighting for a just wage. We've got to maintain the focus on the true spirit of what MLK was fighting for, jobs and dignity. And he saw unions as a space for that. We've seen threats to this kind of organizing, whether through Janus or budget cuts, that really have only resulted in increasing the burdens and struggles of working people. The next mayor has to have a clear vision in defending and protecting human rights, the rights of Black and Brown communities, and labor rights. This means protecting the livelihood of workers, providing housing, transportation, and education. And if anyone should have access to quality support and services, it should be our union members. It's not lost on me that the majority of DC 37 members are actually women of color. And I want to take this opportunity to actually give props to Henry for his leadership in ensuring that the Lillian Roberts Leadership Program continues to thrive. For those of you who don't know, Lillian Roberts was the former ED of DC 37 and the first Black woman to hold that role. She's a pioneer, but people don't know about her because that's what's happening to our unions. You're the heartbeat of our city, and yet you have not been given that recognition. As a single mother myself, I also want to acknowledge the role that unions play in protecting single mothers, not only economically, but through healthcare, legal services for members and their families. Unions also fight for education. And I know that the stronger unions are, the stronger the working class and the stronger our city. My donors reflect the working class. I appreciate the small dollar contributions I get. I recognize that that could be spent on diapers or baby formula. I thank you for your service. And I remind you that I'm fighting the fight that's not the popular fight. I'm actually fighting not to bring New York City back to normal, but to create a new New York City that has never existed before, one that centers all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dianne. Up next is Scott Stringer. Scott Stringer has served as a member of the New York State Assembly, as Manhattan Borough President, and he currently serves as New York City Comptroller. Scott, the floor is yours.
Scott, you're muted.
Scott, you're muted.
You're mute, Scott.
All right. You hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yep, all good.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, Jamila. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Jeremy and Donald and Shaun. It's really great to be here with all of you. I'm running for mayor because we have real challenges in this city. We have an economic crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. We have a social justice crisis, all at the same time. Over 400,000 New Yorkers are still unemployed. The pandemic is still raging in our communities. And this virus exposed how we underinvested in communities of color for decades. I'm running because I have the vision and the experience to build our city back. Look, we've been here before. DC 37 has always been there. This union has stood up after the fiscal crisis in the 1970s. Many of you remember that. This union stood tall on Barclay Street after 9/11. You stood up after Hurricane Sandy. And again, you stood up for our city during this pandemic. So many members risked their lives to keep our city running, and too many union members passed away. I'm going to honor those sacrifices and ensure that no worker has to fight back alone. I will bring this economy back stronger than ever because partnering with this union is what we've always done. We're never going to balance the budget on the backs of our brothers and sisters in labor. Never going to look at budgets through the lens of who is expendable. My pledge to you tonight, I will watch your back the same way you watch the back of our city. We fought together against layoffs, on pay parity for daycare workers, for libraries, for rat inspectors, on prevailing wage. And we've won together time and time again. And I have honored my responsibility, working with Henry to protect the retirement security of everyone in this union for the past 8 years. And I didn't do it alone. I want to shout out tonight the DC 37 professionals who work in the controller's office, my partners. This work could never have been done without all of you. You know, it's going to take real government and political skills to get things done. And I believe that no one in this race matches my experience. But like many of you, I grew up here. I grew up in Washington Heights. I believe in this city. I believe in this city for my children, for your children, for all of you. And I'm going to fight like hell for this city. And we're going to bring it back stronger than ever together.
Thank you, Scott. Next up, we have Maya Riley. Maya Riley has worked as counsel to the mayor and as chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. She has also worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the American Civil Liberties Union. The floor is yours, Maya.
Thank you so much, Donald. And thank you all for being here. Let me just start by saying I'm running to be the next mayor of New York City, even though I've never run for public office before, because I committed my life to racial justice work. And I did that knowing that we in New York City can be a place where everyone has dignity. And for me, that was informed by my experiences as a young child living in a Black community, going to an underfunded, overcrowded public school, and knowing not only that we did not have a quality education and were not seen as equal, that I also watched my neighbors disappearing, displaced, when no matter how hard they worked, the rents would go up and they couldn't afford it. So I became a civil rights lawyer, child of activists, knew what a picket was when I was a kid, but not a picnic, because that's what we did. We protested. But I became a civil rights lawyer from the ACLU to the Legal Defense Fund, working for the U.S. Attorney's Office, because I knew that we needed justice, and worked on multiple issues because we don't live single issue lives. I worked on education equity. I worked on access to healthcare and saving maternal and childcare beds in Harlem. And I switched to the policy side because I was litigating, bringing lawsuits to make policy change. And when September 11th happened, the same thing happened that happens in every crisis. Communities of color get hit the hardest. And then when the $21 billion came in from federal government, it was the Lower East Side and Chinatown that got cut out of the catchment area. So I founded an organization called the Center for Social Inclusion, and we named in the early 2000s a mission that was to dismantle structural racism, working on every issue. I went into City Hall in 2014. And the reason I did that was because of dignity. Because just like Shirley Chisholm said, she said, look, you can either complain and whimper on the sidelines, or you can make progress by implementing ideas. And when I went in 2014, after 25 years as a racial justice advocate, I saw the proof point. You know, when you come in with a different perspective and a bigger and bolder vision, you can get things done, like every single unit in Queensbridge houses, free broadband. But I also saw how it failed. And you were not the failures. It was City Hall. Because just like we saw in COVID, and just like all of my colleagues have said, it is the workers of this city in all the different capacities that kept us going. And like every crisis, communities of color were hit first and hardest. So one of the things that I am proposing when we come back is to recognize not just that we should not lay you off. That is not what we do in a crisis, but that we should also invest $10 billion, New Deal New York, in bringing 100,000 jobs back, but directly to communities you live in. Because one of the things I know and I've heard is the housing insecurity and food insecurity, even of our city workers. And that is unacceptable. And in addition to New Deal New York, we've also talked about gun violence. And one of the things I will do as a mayor is I will listen, I will learn, and I will partner with you in solving the problems of our communities, because that's what your work represents, but that's also who you are. And with gun violence, we're going to put $18 million into hard-hit communities for a participatory justice fund so that you can say what works in your communities. We're going to do a lot more than that, and I know we'll have time to talk about it. But let me just say this. It is not the traditional path of politics that's going to bring us back better, stronger, and reimagined. It's a leadership with a vastly different and more bold vision that knows how to get it done. And it is time that we have people who represent our communities and not paths of traditional politics to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Next, and certainly not least, is Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang was a former CEO of the test prep company, Manhattan Prep. He was the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Venture for America. And last year, he was a candidate in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary elections. Mr. Yang, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jamila. It's a pleasure and privilege to address you all. When I think of your union, I think of the folks who look after my son Damien every day. He's a public school student, and those of you who are parents know the feeling of dropping your child off at school, leaving him in the care of folks who are going to be looking after him, making sure the school is safe and clean. That is what you all do every day. and I am profoundly grateful. You all are very nervous right now because you know we're facing an historic crisis. You're looking around saying, are we going to get through this with the same number of opportunities, with the same level of benefits and compensation? I'm going to present to you that there are three major variables that will determine the answers to what your paths forward look like. Number one is how much aid we get from the federal government. And I am going to make a more effective champion for New York City than others because I'm friends with a lot of folks in the administration. I have dozens of friends on Capitol Hill, and I will make the case loud and clear that New York City has been giving more than it's been getting for years, and there is no national recovery without New York. The second thing is, how quickly are we going to come back from this crisis? We're all frustrated by the vaccine rollout. Many of you are essential workers, and you know you should have already gotten the vaccine, but you have not. We need to get the vaccine rollout right, but then after that, we need to give people the confidence to be able to come together in their place of work or school or even restaurants and bars by having a very quick and easy way to verify that you've been vaccinated. It is that kind of app on our phone that is going to enable this city to come back and avoid the worst of this crisis. We need to accelerate the recovery. And the third thing is, how are we going to balance this budget? Because we should not have any illusions. We're going to be facing a budgetary shortfall for years. I have run a small business in New York City, and I know how to get into the guts of an operation and make sure that we can get the money without looking at the people. People are not costs. People are the point. That is how we have to balance the budget. We have to find the inefficiencies that do not touch our people, your compensation, the benefits you've bargained hard for.
Thank you, Andrew. We're now going to go into the question period. As I mentioned earlier, all the questions were submitted when our members registered for the event. And if we have time for it, we'll get to some of those that were posted in the Q&A as well. I'm going to ask each candidate a question, and then we'll give a few others an opportunity to respond as well. Obviously, we don't have time for everybody to answer every single question, but we'll try and spread the love and hear from folks that we haven't heard from. So the first question is for Comptroller Stringer. This question is from Cyprian, who is a member of Local 371. And he asked if you would support an early retirement incentive for New York City employees if the bill is passed by the New York State Legislature. You're on mute. There you go.
Thank you. Sorry for that again.
No worries.
Look, we need to find a way to reduce city headcount. We should do so voluntarily rather than through layoffs. That's why I joined this union at rallies and said, don't threaten 22,000 workers. An early retirement program properly structured is one way to do that. There's legislation in New York right now, in Albany right now, that's backed by the Municipal Labor Council, which looks reasonable to me, something I would support. But look, we should first see if we need to take steps after federal aid is owed. But I would work with this union to craft an early retirement that works for the members.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to take a stab at this question?
Yes.
I would support it strongly.
Okay, great. Donald, why don't you go with the next one? And we'll just, moving forward, we'll just use the raise your hand feature if you'd like to answer the question as well. That would probably be easiest.
Thank you. Next question we have is from Francis from Local 371. And this question is for Eric Adams. Do you think that New York City should take ownership of the subway system?
Without the purse strings, I believe it's foolish. I know Albany. Albany has no problem at all in turning over the subway system with you, and they'll keep the purse strings. You must control the dollars in order to get the system what it needs. And so if we make a decision to take control, the city council and the mayor, without controlling the dollars of the subway system, we're setting ourselves up for failures. What we should do is expand the MTA board. A member from every borough should be added to the board. We need a louder voice on the board to ensure that New York City, which really is the feeder for our MTA system, is in place. But no, if we don't have the dollars attached to it, it's the wrong thing to do, in my opinion.
Thank you. Will anyone else like to chime in on this?
I thought that was a high five.
I would just like to say, I agree with Eric that we need the dollars, but we also need the MTA. The fact is, it's very, very hard to manage our recovery if you don't have control over the way that people get to work and school every day. And it's hard to integrate subways, buses, and other means of getting to work if they're out of your hands. So I've looked at the numbers. It's not pretty. But the reality is it's very, very hard to manage a recovery if you're not managing the way 5.5 million New Yorkers get around every single day. And that includes the subways. It's a very, very big bite, but it's hard to get the city back on its feet if the biggest artery is not in your control.
Thank you.
Can I just add one point, which is whatever we say about the MTA, it must include a partnership with the federal government, because the reality is we have to and have the opportunity, both in an infrastructure bill that is gonna come out of this administration, but also in what kinds of grants and programs come out of the Department of Transportation. Transportation equity is an issue I worked on as a racial justice advocate at national level, and it is a critical component of how we're also going to make sure we address transit deserts. And too many of our communities of color, do not have adequate public transit. There are multiple strategies that we will use, and New Deal New York will have capital construction that will include the opportunity for things like bus rapid transit lanes.
Jamila, can I also pivot on what Eric is saying? Look,
Yes.
in a utopian society, sure, it'd be great to control the subways, but I've crunched the numbers. We can't take on the debt service. We can't take on the debt. It is not practical for us today to take over the MTA. But here's what a mayor can do and should do. We may not be able to take over the subway system because of the mounting debt, but mayors control the streets. And that's where we can build out a transportation network, investing in busways, bike lanes, busways, looking at reimagining some of our superhighways that cause asthma. Why build a BQE highway because we have to tear it down and build another superhighway? Why don't we deck the Cross Bronx and get away from the Robert Moses way of building the city? In a fiscal crisis and a pandemic, we have to be careful that the proposals we talk about are really able to be implemented. Unfortunately, right now, we just can't afford to guess, but we can afford to do big, bold things with the authority and the money that we have.
So we'll take one more response on this question, and then Jamila will take us away with the next question.
I want to agree with Scott on the point that we don't have a pathway to be able to take over the subways, but we should have a mayor that has more power over the subways. And I've proposed specifically that we should bring not only revenues from congestion pricing, we should be finding ways to take any new development that happens in our city and take revenues from that development, put towards the MTA, and in exchange, get more power for the mayor to be able to have control over the subways and make sure they work for New Yorkers. I'm also the only candidate in this race that really has the history and the relationships to bring the resources that we need from Washington, D.C. President Obama and Vice President Biden asked me to lead the $4 trillion budget. Just last month, I was on the phone with leaders in both sides of Congress to make sure that we were getting billions of dollars for our MTA. There's no one in this race who has the same experience and history to be able to go to Washington and fight for the resources that we need to actually make our subways work for New Yorkers and to make our buses and everything else a city that really works for everyone.
Let me just, can I just add to this? Yeah, we're missing the fundamental issue here. We're facing over the next 3 years, next 3 to 4 years, $4 plus $4 billion of budget deficits. To conceive that we're going to bring the MTA into a $90+ billion budget, and the MTA is significantly large, billions of dollars, we simply cannot afford this. We simply cannot afford it. And we don't have the resources to be able to run the MTA the way that it's supposed to be run. We commute 4 million visitors a year that create a day, that create 59% of the retail revenue that then goes back out into the communities. We need to have the MTA up and running. The solvency, it being not bankrupt, is another issue. So we need to have the federal government support. I do challenge the fact that others have said that they're one to a better position. I introduced Vice President Kamala Harris to New York. And so we have relationships across the spectrum, and we're 1 or 2 phone calls away from those people who can have an impact on what takes place with the transportation system of this city, which is not only vital to this city, but it's vital to the country. So let's not get lost in whether or not we can afford it. We cannot afford it. We need to be able to come up with a vision for how we're going to address the current budget. And unless we address that, we don't have a future.
Thank you, Ray. The next question is for Shaun Donovan. It was submitted by Michael DeMarco, who's president of Local 1455. Mike asked mentioned this morning, the city released a new round of procurement contracts in an attempt to hire consultants to do the work of city workers. What is your position of contracting out city services? My local has proved that by contracting in, we can save money for the city and our citizens. I would like to expand on our model and save jobs and money.
Thanks, Jamila, and I couldn't agree more. I put out a specific plan earlier in this race about how we would solve our budget challenges. As I said a moment ago, President Obama and Vice President Biden asked me to lead the $4 trillion federal budget. And we not only brought down our budget deficit faster than any time since World War II, we got the Affordable Care Act done. We got big investments in housing to end homelessness, in creating jobs, all of those things we did while bringing the budget deficit down. I'm the only candidate in the race who has that experience of actually leading the biggest budget in the world for the government. And as part of that, I worked side by side with Mike Fishman, the former president of 32BJ, who's a co-chair of my campaign, to create what we call high road contracting. We got rid of contracts that we didn't need in the federal government. The same thing I did when I led HPD here in the city. And what's more, we held our contractors accountable. We held them accountable to wage standards, to providing healthcare, and to providing benefits. That's why I signed a deal with 32BJ to make sure that in affordable housing in New York City, for the first time ever, we had prevailing wage, good benefits. We absolutely should not be using contractors where we can have city employees doing those jobs. That's been my history as a leader in the public sector. But it's also that where we do have contracts, we have to create real accountability and enforcement around the things that create truly family-sustaining jobs.
Okay, the first hand I saw up was Maya. Miss Wiley, sorry. You're on mute.
When we are talking, which we should not be, about laying off 22,000 of our people, I just want to say, not only is it absolutely correct to say, stop wasting limited dollars on outside of city government and outside of our residents getting jobs. I'll give you an example. When I was in City Hall working on universal broadband access, I got those Queensbridge units done at a cost of roughly $1 million for 3 years of service. I was told I had to contract at a cost of $800,000 for a report that my own staff could have written. And I wasn't even given a choice. Now, when I am mayor, not only will that stop, just think about how much more connectivity our people would have, in addition to ensuring that we're utilizing the expertise and experience of our city workers, because in an economic crisis, we absolutely want to keep our people working, because that is part of what gets us out of this crisis.
Ms. Garcia, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. This is an area where I have worked before. At DEP, we had often had contractors come in to do maintenance. We actually designed a program to have sewage treatment workers do the work and actually compete head to head with the contractors and win that work to ensure that we were doing the maintenance that needed to happen, but we were doing it with city workers and making sure that we got the best quality that we needed to have. I have seen it happen, I've implemented, and I know it can continue.
Mr. Borough President, and then we'll move on.
Can I have one more?
Oh,
Okay.
go ahead,
You
Scott.
can't, because
We'll
no,
let
you
Ray
can't,
move right
Scott, because
close.
my hand's been up.
Okay. Whenever you get to me.
First, and again, I've heard people say this throughout the conversation about, some great plans they rolled out. And I'm really encouraging people to go to our website of 100+ steps forward for New York City. I think it's imperative for people to see your complete thought process. And one area that we talked about in our 100+ steps that we rolled out is the procurement process. If you don't inspect what you expect, is all suspect. I say this over and over again. We need a transparent system to look at where all of our procurement dollars are going to women and minority-owned businesses, as well as who are some of the out-of-town purchases, the billions of dollars that we spend outside our city on consultants. Look what happened with the New York City Police Department. They hired a white consultant firm to help them with relationships with Black and brown communities in the police department. We have to better analyze in real time where our tax dollars are going. And those are the things that I'm talking about: transparency, real-time governing, instead of scatter and pray and hope we're getting the results we're looking for. And the outside and our addiction on outside consultants is something that will stop immediately. As the mayor of the city of New York, we're going to freeze those contracts, reevaluate them, and see if we can recycle those dollars within our city agencies and at a minimum within the city of New York.
Got it. Okay, Ms. Morales, then Scott, and then we're moving on to the next question.
Thank you. I won't take long because I just want to add, I don't want to repeat what Eric just said. I basically, my thoughts on this is that, we don't need COVID time or no COVID time. We actually need to be prioritizing our communities and our workers. So all of these contracts that are outsourced by the government, all of the bloating, all of the bureaucracy that takes money out of our local economy and gives it to outside consultant companies, most of whom often are not even based in New York City, need to actually prioritize our local economy and our local workers. So that's where we should be investing. We should not be looking to further balance the budget or the city's deficit on the backs of those who we've been calling heroes and essential workers throughout the last 20 months, but that's not specific to COVID. That should be the case during all times. And I'll stop there.
And
Scott,
why don't you close us out?
Let me just quickly add that as mayor, I'm going to reject the backdoor hiring through these consultant contracts. This is for non-union workers. This is true with computer aides, school nurses, childcare workers. I've worked as controller with DC 37 directly on this issue. And what I have said time and time again, when the mayor has threatened to lay off workers in the name of a budget balance, it has not been the way to do it. There's so many outsized contracts. I've audited them. I know where they are, and I know where to get rid of them on day one.
Thank you, Scott. Next up, we have, and I'll just ask for the candidates, once you actually speak on a question, can we just put our hands down in a raise hand feature? That way we know who has spoken and who hasn't. Next question is to Councilman Menchaca. It's from Wiley from Local 375. We hear a lot about wasteful spending in city government. As mayor, what is your plan to address this? What programs and initiatives would you target in the first 100 days? Also, what do you plan on doing to close the budget gap without raising taxes or without reducing services? And please be specific.
Thank you. I think you said Waleed from, what was the local again? I want to make sure to follow up. Put it in the chat.
Local 375.
375. Thank you so much for that question. And there is no doubt waste in this budget. you know, the city council has been negotiating for the last 7 years, and in the last 7 years, our budget has ballooned with incredible surpluses of $2 billion every year. What we need to do is look at agencies and projects that the mayor has brought in, like Thrive, and see where we can actually look for waste. This recent question, this last question, looked at contracts where we brought in non-union contractors to come in and solve cities' problems. What we need to do is bring that funding back to our current staff and ensure that they have what they need. We know that there are going to be a lot of negotiations around union contracts. That is where we can actually spend more money to secure and stabilize our union workers. And I want to think about the police department as well. I know in the chat and in the questions, there's a lot of not just waste, but misdirected funding that's going to support a police department that is highly militarized and has caused so much pain in our Black and Brown communities, that caused hundreds and thousands of people to march this summer, not just here in the city, but across the country. And so these are the places. So I would demilitarize the NYPD. I would cut Thrive in half and really ensure that the organizations that are doing the good work on the ground would make that happen. And then the other area is the Department of Education. This is where we have ballooned the contracts and bringing private contractors to come in. And I think that is a place where I want to spend a lot of time to remove those contracts and ensure that our teachers and our schools are getting the funding that we need, especially now that COVID has exposed those inefficiencies. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take the other responses to this in this order. We have Shaun Donovan, we'll have Ray next, and then Meyer, and then we'll move on to the next question. So it's Shaun first, Ray, and then Ms. Wiley.
So while he asked for specifics, I want to be very specific about two areas. The first is healthcare. This is the second biggest cost to city government. It's an area where you all have been leaders, and Henry, I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue. The mayor has the power to bring down prescription drug costs, to lower the cost of procedures for city workers and for city hospitals. We have to be using cutting edge techniques. Many of those that we developed in the Affordable Care Act that change the way we deliver healthcare to lower cost and improve the quality. New York City has not been a leader in those areas, and there's a huge potential to partner with union leaders to make sure that we're using the power of purchasing in the city to get a better deal on healthcare, help workers and help unions as well. The second area that absolutely is ripe for change is on homelessness. You heard that I began my career volunteering in a homeless shelter and working on homelessness. We're spending $3 billion a year right now on scattered site shelters. You talk about wasted private procurements. The deals we have with hotels and other providers in the private sector are terrible. And guess what? It is actually cheaper to solve this problem than it is to put a Band-Aid on it with shelter. We need to reimagine our right to shelter as a right to housing in this city. I know this because I led the strategy for President Obama. We dramatically reduced homelessness around the country. In 80 cities and states, we ended veteran homelessness, not reduced it, ended it. And it was cheaper to solve it because in the end, when someone's sleeping on our streets or in a shelter, where do they go for healthcare? To our emergency rooms. They cycle in and out of Rikers, the mental health wings of our public hospitals. And so not only do we cost lives with our current policy of shelter first, we cost taxpayers millions and millions of dollars each year that could be invested in mental health services, in housing, in all of the things that actually solve this problem.
Hi, I thought the question had to do, if I remember it specifically, to how would you manage a budget if you didn't cut and if you didn't raise taxes? I thought that's what the question was. And so my response to that very specific question is we cannot, and all the discussion up to this point is what we're going to cut. We cannot cut our way out of this deficit, and we cannot tax our way out of this deficit. I've been in a position of leadership for more than 13 years, the only person who looks like me, and the only person who's done that in the history of Wall Street, in the history of corporate America. And what you know is that you have to have a vision for how you grow. You have to look at the entirety of the budget. And I've managed over 50 budgets. Every year you have to go through a quarterly, every year you have to go through a quarterly budget. So that's 4 budgets a year. And you have to, and I've managed over 50 budgets that are often bigger than state budgets. And what happens if you don't manage that budget is that your people don't get rewarded or compensated, and you don't get rewarded or compensated. It means your people don't get paid. So this is not a popularity contest. This is not something that you go advertise. This is not the status quo. You actually have to have a plan on which you execute year after year. And I've done that for 13 years. And when you look at this budget, we have to look at the budget in its entirety. There's not a surplus in the budget. There's a deficit. There is a budget hole which needs to be addressed. The only way we're going to get here is to grow our way out of this. We need to create jobs. We need to be more efficient in how we run the government today, but we need to create jobs. So more of the population, more of DC 37 has jobs, so you can employ more people and give more people opportunity to move from the lower class to the middle class to home ownership to the upper class. That's what this is about. Not about cutting. We can't cut. And my plan economically is no jobs, no dignity, no jobs, no city. We have to focus on the economy, and it has to be the economy. And we have to create jobs, go big, make certain that we invest in the infrastructure, make certain that we invest in affordable housing, make certain that we invest in broadband, because we have 1.5 million of our people, many of them students, don't have access to broadband. And then you have to make certain that you have a plan to have the small businesses recover. They represent more than 50% of the employees in the city. And we have to extend a lifeline to those businesses. And in addition to that, we have to think about what makes this city so attractive, which are the cultural institutions. And we have to invest in the cultural institutions in each of the boroughs. 66 million tourists, many of whom, all of whom are serviced by this group of loyal and dedicated people, 66 million that create billions of dollars of revenue. We have to have a plan to make certain that labor is with us as we go through and identify the plan for how we grow our way out of this, how we create jobs, operate more efficiently, but create jobs. And I, this week, am going to outline a plan that does just that, where labor is at the table with me, making certain that the designs that we have in mind and the vision that we have, where I'm going to lead the greatest inclusive economic comeback in the history of this great city. We have to grow our way out of this. And that's the only way that's the only way this city will survive and have a future. Not cut, but grow. Inclusive growth.
Thank you, brother. Next up, Ms. Wiley.
Thank you. So I'll try to be brief. So I agree with Ray, which is why I have a $10 billion capital construction plan that's going to invest in growth in communities of color. And I also agree with Shaun, and I would partner with DC 37 and other public unions and not-for-profits, including universities, to figure out ways that we could have more of a collaborative to do exactly that kind of bargaining to bring costs down, both on prescription drugs, and to expose the fact that we have hospitals that are price gouging, some of them, because we haven't used our bully pulpit as a city to expose that. But I wanted to add one other thing, going back to Carlos's answer. So one is, we already know we can actually bring revenue in. And I know this from your president, who's very smart. And that's why listening and learning and partnering is so important. Because if we're leaving $500 million to $1 billion on the table, because we have nurses at DOE and DOHMH, and we're leaving Medicaid reimbursements on the table, that's revenue, that's money back in our coffers that we need to collect. But we also need to do that in a way that ensures pay parity. And I will do that. And the other thing is, I just wanted to disagree with Carlos on one thing. Thrive in and of itself, the spending, so much of what Thrive is are existing programs that our public workers are carrying out that just got the Thrive label slapped on it. Some of the new spend, this was all about implementation, and part of leadership is understanding how to implement and spend so that we're getting the return on our investments, and partnering with our programs on what's working and what can be strengthened and done better is exactly how I will partner. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question. It's for Ms. Garcia. It's I got to keep us moving, guys.
It's fine, Jamila. It's all right.
It's for Ms. Garcia, and it is from Cynthia, who is a member of Local 768. She asked, do you support investing in renewable energy and efficiency? If so, what will be the process to move towards renewable energy?
Thank you for that question. I've been working on the issue of climate change for the last 14 years, whether or not it was protecting our watershed or rolling out the largest food scrap collection program in the nation, if not the world. We have to be making investments in renewable energy. I have proposed turning Rikers into a renewable energy facility, in part to get rid of the peaker plants that are on the North Shore of Queens. We can do this. We know that in buildings, 40% of our greenhouse gases comes from heat and hot water. We need to decarbonize our economy as we move forward, but also incentivize folks. There are places that are transit deserts in the city of New York. Let's use our property tax code and abatements to have people put electric chargers on their property. There are a lot of interesting solutions as we move forward, but we know that we need to collect food scraps. We need to turn that into compost. We know that can also be an energy source. We know that we can do renewables on the rooftops of our schools, of NYCHA, whether or not that's a green roof or solar. There are a lot of exciting possibilities. We have to be making those investments going forward, because in the long run, not only will it clean our air and keep us healthier, but will protect our environment. Thank you.
Shaun?
Thanks, Jamila. I want to just focus on one specific area here. Just days after I formally announced my campaign, we put out the broadest, most comprehensive climate plan. I was the first candidate to make a pledge to take no fossil fuel money, but one specific area that is a huge opportunity is in public housing. There are 10,000 DC 37 members that live in public housing. This is not a theory to you. This is reality, that you live through some of the worst conditions in housing in this country, and that has to end. We need a mayor who puts public housing first. I'm the only one who has the relationships and the knowledge to be able to get the $40 billion that we need. Part of that we should be making sure we raise through innovative partnerships. Solar should be on every roof in NYCHA. As we replace all the heating and air conditioning and plumbing systems, we ought to be putting in cutting edge systems that recycle water, that do all kinds of things. And guess what? We can put public housing residents to work doing that work. I'm proposing the most aggressive apprenticeship program, a New York City Job Corps, in the history of the city. And a big part of that would be working with public housing residents to put them to work and make them union members, to make sure that we are building the greenest, most sustainable public housing in the country.
Thank you. Eric?
Yes, and you know, I hear many of our colleagues talk about the great relationships they have often. Let me tell you something, the mayor of the city of New York will have great relationships. This is an important city here, and we're fortunate to have his state senator in Schumer. Hakeem Jeffries is the fifth strongest Democrat on the Hill. New York will establish those relationships because this is a powerhouse. But in the area of renewable energy, again, I want to point to the 100 steps for New York. And as we look towards renewable energy, we must have the diversity. It must include everyday New Yorkers. There's no reason we cannot use retrofit shop classes in schools, these places and locations, to allow children to leave school with the certifications that they can be employed right away. Every child is not going to have a direct pathway to an Ivy League school. They may have a job while they're doing it, like I was, to pay their way through college while they are attempting to get that education or to provide for their families. as we talk about the conversation of sustainability and renewable energy, we often leave out Black and brown communities. We are not just places where pipelines are put in place, but we should be places where we have real conversation about renewable energy, and I'm going to focus on that.
Thanks. We'll hear from Scott, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Well, first of all, some good news to share, and I want to thank Henry Garrido. The New York City retirement system, the pension system, after years of hard work, put our money where our mouth is, and the trustees and I have undergone a $4 billion divestment from fossil fuels. This is one of the largest in the nation. Thank you, Borough President Adams, for being part of that as a trustee, but I want to thank Henry. Also, while it's historic, it's also not the only way we green our city. We have to not just divest, but invest. And as your city controller, I have doubled the green investment in the city. I've doubled down on projects for solar energy. I've said that as mayor, I'm going to work with the next controller to create a green jobs and blue bonds projects, because that's investor interest all over the country. I agree with Shaun, we need to invest in jobs at NYCHA with retrofitting, and I'll do that as mayor, keeping in mind as controller, I've done more investigations of NYCHA than any controller in history. But today, we took a big step, folks. We divested. We said no to the energy companies that are polluting our city and generations of kids for the future. And lastly, we need a resiliency plan. The mayor's resiliency plan to take care of Wall Street is not the same as taking care of Main Street. And I'm going to embark on a 520 miles agenda for resiliency. I'm going to tap the unused FEMA money that has been sitting while this administration can't figure out how to rebuild us out. I know how to do that. I've offered a plan. And while a lot of candidates, my colleagues, will take great pride in their climate change plan, nobody has offered the most comprehensive climate change plan that I have, because it comes with real action, and that action is a historic fossil fuel divestment this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. So the next question is from Terrence from Local 2627, and it's to Eric Adams. What is your position on holding police officers accountable when they misbehave?
Thank you so much for that. Accountability is crucial, and no one knows it better than I do. Many know my story, being arrested and beat by police officers, only to see that the lack of accountability was there. It traumatized me, and I experienced PTSD from that beating. I could not listen to a police siren without reliving that beating. I could not watch a television show, and I couldn't see a blue and white police vehicle. So it was real to me. And so when civil rights activists, Herbert Daughtry and others, came to 13 of us to go into the police department to fight for reform from inside, and I started 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, and we became a voice. I was testified in federal court, Floyd versus NYPD, where the judge mentioned my testimony on how we were using stop and frisk in an abusive way. I know what it is to fight against reform, to fight for reform in the police department. So we would do three things. Number one, zero tolerance. No more 4 years before we remove police officers who are abusive. Fair trial, but quick trial. Within 60 days, those who are being charged with serious incidents of abuse of authority or violence, they will have an internal departmental trial, and we determine their removal from service. Number two, if you are on the scene and someone commits a robbery and you're there, you're charged with acting in concert. That's the same for police officers. If you're there, you see an officer participating in illegal action and you don't take affirmative steps to stop him, you're charged with acting in concert, and you're going to be held responsible for that at the same time. And number three, take out the internal investigation for serious offensive police officers out of the police department. Let the Department of Investigation conduct the investigations. Right now, I have no faith in the Internal Affairs Bureau. Many of those officers have come up through the ranks with the people assigned there. Far too often, the information is slipped through and investigations are damaged because of that. We're going to allow an outside entity to do thorough investigations. And my police commissioner, who's going to be a woman, the first police commissioner, woman police commissioner in the city, she is going to bring to me to have the final sign off on the outcome of officers. It cannot be just the police commissioner. We're going to set the right message. You are held to a higher standard. You have the authority to take life and liberty. With that should come a serious oversight, and you should have the ability to do the job the way it should be done. And I know that job because I did it well for 22 years.
Thank you, Mr. BP. We're going to go in this order. The 5 hands that's up, we're going to take all 5 and then we'll move on. So first up, we have Kathryn Garcia, and then we'll go to Dianne Morales.
Thank you. This is clearly one of the most important issues that the city is facing, and I would actually say more broadly, the country. We need our police officers to protect us, for every single New Yorker to feel that they are a guardian. When you are at the Department of Sanitation, if you take a $20 bribe for taking a black bag and putting it in a white truck from a restaurant, you get fired. I understand how to make sure there is accountability across a uniform force. But culture change is really much broader than that. It can't just be implicit bias training for one module in the police academy. It has to be part of the day-to-day life of every patrol officer. And that means training for sergeants and captains to ensure that they are walking the walk and talking the talk. We know that we ask officers to do incredibly difficult jobs, which is why I would increase the age of recruitment to 25, and that I would require all new recruits to live in the city. We need to hold the cops who do the wrong thing rigidly accountable, and we need to celebrate the cops who actually are doing the hard work of forming relationships with communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Ms. Morales, and then Ms. Wiley.
Thanks, Donald. I think the first thing that we have to do in order to hold the NYPD accountable is to actually reclaim and redefine public safety, because policing and public safety are not the same thing. We need to actually begin to provide our communities with the services and supports that they need in order to be safe. When we think about a safe community, we are not thinking about a community that is where there's a heavy police presence and there's a lot of police monitoring. That is not what safe communities look like. Safe communities have quality education, they have job training, they have people that are housed, they have people that are making a livable wage, and they have access to the food and resources that they need. So that's the first thing that we have to do. The other thing that we have to do is to actually remove the burden from police officers that have to respond to situations that are in fact not crimes in progress. We know that the majority of calls to the police are actually social conditions. People that are homeless, people that are suffering from mental health challenges, people that have substance abuse issues. And that's why I've called for the creation of a community first responders department that would be staffed with people who are trained and skilled to intervene and de-escalate and connect people to the services and supports that they need. We need to remove police officers from schools so that we stop the school to prison pipeline. And then we need to hold police officers who violate civil rights in any way, shape, or form accountable. We need to eliminate impunity, and we need to discipline them immediately and effectively. So those are some of the things I think we need to do even before we can actually talk about holding police accountable. First, we have to provide for our communities, provide them with what they really need.
Thank you. So next up, we have 3 more, so we'll do it in this order. Ray McGuire, you're first, Andrew Yang, and then Scott Stringer.
Yeah, listen, this is a fundamental problem, which as a 6'4", 200-pound black man, I can fully appreciate. On the day that we went to launch the video for this campaign, 2 blocks away from here, I was in a car and our driver was stopped and I was next to him, obviously. And so the window gets rolled down and the police officer has a radio in his left hand and he's holstered on his right hand. So I understand the implications of where we are in the lack of trust and the divisiveness that now takes place in the city, and how fundamental it is for us to change. And so my approach to this is what I call RAP, which is the police need to be respectful, accountable, and proportionate. Respectful, we need to go back to community policing so that you develop a relationship between the police and the community, which now has been breached. Accountability has been talked about, but it would be from my account at the instances when there's been a police abuse that we take immediate and visible action. We pay $200 million a year to settle serial abuser cases. And so we need to do that. And proportionality, it's been said that if the only thing that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When it comes to Black and brown communities, it's a sledgehammer, which is completely unacceptable. So we need to restructure, reallocate the funds in the New York City Police Department and invest those funds into mental health care organizations. 4 out of every 10 calls that go to 911 have to do with mental health issues. We need to invest in the mental health care professionals. We need to invest in the violence, the gang interrupters, which have been highly effective at reducing and sometimes preventing gang violence, which is on the rise here. We need to invest in those community organizations that have kept children out of trouble, like Summer Jobs, which is part of my economic program, but it's also part of this program, to get these kids off of the street, to make certain that they have something that gives them some other thing to get done. And we need to make certain that we return to that kind of relationship that existed under Dinkins, safe cities, safe streets, where you don't have the police as your enemy, but police who respect you and who are held accountable and who deal with each situation proportionately. And that's the RAP, change the culture. And the police commissioner that will work under my administration will live that culture, which is a culture of respect, accountability, and proportionality. And unless that person, unless he or she lives by that culture, then we'll get somebody else in that position. Reallocate, reform, restructure, and hold accountable.
So we thank you for that answer. We have just a slight change. I actually called on Maya Wiley and then skipped over her. So we're going to allow her to go now. What I'm going to do, Scott, there's actually a similar question that we have coming up that was addressed to you. So I'll leave you for that question. And then Andrew Yang, you can actually second that question behind Scott. So we'll do it that way. Maya, you're
Thank you, Donald. And let me just start by saying, having chaired the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, I saw up close and personally just both how it worked on the civilian side and how it worked on the police department side in terms of accountability. And I'm proud that I worked and got the Daniel Pantaleo case, the officer who killed Eric Garner, over to the police department with our most stringent recommendations and had to go in and fight and protected the power of our civilian prosecutors inside the CCRB to prosecute that case. Because one of the things we have to do on accountability that is structural is we should remove the administrative law judges and the prosecution function out of the police department altogether, because the only cases that our civilian prosecutors can try are the ones that come through the CCRB, and there are many disciplinary cases that do not come through the CCRB. So that's a structural shift. But I also want to add that in our gun violence prevention plan, one of the things we have said explicitly is that we will double the number of summer youth employment for kids when we see communities with high levels of gun violence, but going back to how we change culture, because we currently have a police department that says courtesy, professionalism, and respect, and the acronym unfortunately doesn't make the culture change. And one of the things that we have to do is very clearly define the rules of the road, because when we at CCRB wanted to find discipline but didn't have enough evidence to do it, so often it was because the rules themselves were so gray, because the police had fought tooth and nail to create wide swaths of discretion. And the truth is, in cities like Camden, New Jersey, which has an 18-page excessive force policy, very clearly setting out what is okay and is not okay, is a very different and significantly more effective model to reducing the cases in the first place. Because once an Eric Garner has been killed, we don't get him back. And so the rules of the road are critically important to even reduce the misconduct in the first place, as well as hold accountable if it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Scott, this next question was for you. It is from Christina, who is a member of Local 3005. Where do you stand on calls for abolition and defund the NYPD campaign that calls for a 50% reduction in the NYPD's budget and police force size in order to redirect those resources into community solutions that address root causes?
Well, a number of things. First, during the last budget fight, I sketched out a $1 billion 4-year plan to move to cut the budget of NYPD, but through the lens of reallocating that money into our communities. And I did that because I felt that when we were cutting budgets of every city agency, it was time not to hold the police department, which bloated its budget, and we should not have held it harmless. I did that because I recognize that not every community problem or crime issue can be solved with a badge or a gun. I did grow up in the 1970s in Washington Heights, where there were 2,000 murders a year. I do remember when the 8 train was a rolling crime scene, and I don't want my children or any child to go back to that time and place. But I also know that over-policing in communities of color has got to stop, and that we have to be more proactive. So in addition to reallocating funding so that we can build mentorship programs, we can create opportunities for real summer jobs, which is why I said Bill de Blasio was wrong to balance the budget on the backs of kids. I believe that we have to rethink policing and have a 21st century strategic plan. 40% of 911 calls, as Ray mentioned, go to things that are not crimes in progress, mental health issues, quality of life concerns, and yet we send the police. We shouldn't be doing that. We should send mental health experts. We should send people who have expertise in communicating with our young people in our neighborhoods. The other thing we have to recognize is the prison pipeline has been in effect since I've been in the state assembly. I remember when Republican state senators wanted to build prisons in upstate New York because you could build them in 18 months, take Black and brown children mostly, ship them upstate, and create a whole economy around the prison. I remember as a young assembly member standing with Al Van and Roger Green and some of the preeminent activist legislators who said, don't build prisons, build daycare centers, build schools, give kids opportunity. Don't lose kids to the prison industrial complex. And let me tell you again, DC 37, Henry Garrido and myself, you know what we did? We were the first public pension fund in America to divest from the private prison industrial complex. So here's my plan. First, reallocate some of that money into the communities and create a new style policing that is really about empowering communities. Second, let's take the CCRB as the final arbiter of what police discipline is all about. We should have done that in year 1 of the de Blasio administration. It's amazing that the police commissioner has this discretion. And 3, let us understand that by reducing police responsibility to the crimes that we need to solve, and I do think we have to solve the shooting complaints and the lack of finding the shooters in communities. The conveyance rate is the lowest it's ever been. It's 26%. That's not acceptable. But we do need to think creatively on policing. Lastly, we're not leading this in the country. In Eugene, Oregon, there's a mechanism where when there's a mental health issue, they don't send the cops, they send mental health professionals. 24,000 calls in Eugene were for mental health episodic issues. Out of those 24,000 calls, 150 calls needed the police. We need to create a new police paradigm in the city, one that doesn't incarcerate our young people and one that doesn't over-police communities of color. We've seen too much of this in this city for many years.
Thank you, Scott. Andrew? You're on mute.
Sorry, it's been a little bit. I agree with so much that has been said today. And I think most people agree that we are over-investing in not just the $6 billion plus in the NYPD, but as Ray mentioned, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars settling lawsuits that are filed against the NYPD every year. And just imagine all of the uses of $200 million plus a year that would be in our schools for our essential workers that's instead going to settle lawsuits. I think everyone agrees that we're underinvesting in so many of our communities that are struggling with substance abuse issues and mental health issues, and that every bit we invest there is going to pay off on multiple fronts. We do need to acknowledge that if you talk to New York City residents, including so many of the people that are on this call tonight, when you ask what your top concerns are, rising crime and public safety issues are either 1, 2, or 3. So we need to take an all hands on deck approach to these issues. And like Scott said, the rate of crimes being solved is unfortunately going down as the rate of crimes are going up. So when we talk about holding police accountable, it's not just for civil rights abuses, it's about solving the crimes that are plaguing our communities at higher levels and are, again, one of the top 3 concerns that people have. We have to be able to do 2 big things at once: improve the efficacy of the policing to solve the violent crimes in our communities, and also enact a culture change. And I agree with Eric that what it takes is a civilian commissioner. I'm not sure if you meant civilian when you said women commissioner, Eric. I agree with so many of the things that are being said here tonight, because I think all of us do. There are so many great candidates here with phenomenal ideas. We need to get everyone together to get the city back on its feet. I admire everyone who's running because you're all running for the right reasons, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Andrew. Carlos?
Thank you, Jamila. And this topic gives us an example and an opportunity to look at all the ideas that are being given, but really connecting all these ideas to courage is, I think, what we need in this next mayor. When we look at the budget and the negotiations that we had last year, we learned so much about this budget that still remains unknown to the public. So one, we just need more information. And I hope that the city council this year can bring everybody more information so that DC 37 can help us understand it. What we know is that the NYPD spends over $200 million a year sometimes for the cost of lawsuits in the things that we're talking about here. That is money that is wasted. The union should potentially pay for those lawsuits, or we can just fire the police officers to bring justice. Next, almost $1 billion goes into overtime. We try to do caps that don't work. These are the things that are wasted, not just wasted money, but a reprioritization of the things that we need in our communities. Because we know that more police don't equal more public safety. That's the message that's coming from our youth. And finally, I think what's really important here is that when we think about the voting records of people who have been elected, and I'm one of the 3 elected officials that are running with city council experience, municipal government experience, I have voted no for the building of the 4 new jails that are totaling up to $9.2 billion of infrastructure. And yet Rikers is not closed. I voted no on the budget because we did not go far enough with the NYPD. That's the courage you're going to need for this mayor to sit down with all these great ideas and to push back. Thank you.
Thank you. Dianne?
Thank you. I guess the first thing I want to say is, police don't prevent crime. They actually respond to crime and then a whole bunch of other things. And, we're talking about the increasing rates of crime, but the reality of it is we're talking about that within the context of the city, the state, and the federal government failing to meet people's basic human needs. We're talking about people trying to survive at a time of increased insecurity, where they don't know if they're going to be able to pay next month's rent, where they don't have food on the table, where they don't have access to healthcare, and they're living in a global pandemic. So the reality of it is that people's needs have increased, and we have failed to respond to that, even as we increase the NYPD budget in New York City. That is just, it is a reflection of our priorities and our values. We want to be sold this bill of goods that there's an austerity budget that's required, and yet we continue to increase funding to the very source of so much racial strife and death and disparity in this country. So if we want to do something about policing and safety and the austerity budget, the first thing we need to do is to actually invest in our communities and make sure that our people are safe. So I was the first candidate to call for defunding the police, and I stand behind that. And further, I call for a $3 billion cut for all of the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned in terms of the bloating of that budget and the missed spending that happens with those dollars. We need to take that money and invest it in meeting people's needs, first so that they can stay home and be safe, Second, so that they can be secure. And third, so that they can stay healthy and we can navigate the rest of this crisis. We need to be investing directly in our people and directly in our communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sean, why don't you close us out and then we'll go to the next question.
Thank you, Jamila. And I want to agree with a lot of the other candidates that there are so many good ideas that we've heard here that we need to be prioritizing. I would really just add two things to it. One is that, for so many years, this has felt like a hopeless problem, that it has felt like we can't actually make progress. I think we have a moment of opportunity right now with the movement of young people we saw in our streets, for the demands for change. And the question is, who has the experience and knowledge to really harness that movement for change? And I think one of the things that's unique about me as a candidate, as HUD Secretary, I worked with mayors all across the country to make real change on these issues. I was part of the 21st Century Policing Task Force led by Eric Holder. We worked with police chiefs to make real reform across the country, sometimes under threat of prosecution by the Justice Department. Maya mentioned Camden, New Jersey. We worked with the mayor of Camden, New Jersey. Scott mentioned the Cahoots program in Oregon. We worked to help implement that program. And so I believe we can learn in New York City. We are the best city in the world, but we can learn from what other cities do to make real reform. The last thing I would just say, an issue that hasn't come up here is housing. And I know from firsthand experience that we will not succeed in helping folks coming out of Rikers, coming out of prison, to succeed in coming back to their families, to their communities, if we don't prioritize housing. When I was housing commissioner in this city, our reentry policy when we began was a token, literally, and being dropped on a corner in Long Island City with just that token. You remember tokens, that was it. And I started taking some of our housing vouchers, giving them to folks coming out of Rikers. Just that one change was remarkable. A year later, 95% of those folks were stably housed. They were getting back to work and they hadn't reoffended. Dramatic change just from an investment in housing. We need that kind of reinvestment in housing to make solutions work, to break the cycle of incarceration in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. And that is the perfect segue into housing. The next question is actually from—
I knew that, Donald.
From Yolette, from Local 1549. As a New Yorker, and this question is actually for Andrew Yang. As a New Yorker and city worker and someone who has applied for affordable housing, it has been my experience along with others that affordable is not affordable. There are people who have moved into our area with larger incomes. And so when the area median is counted, we are financially excluded. What can be done to equalize the opportunity of real affordable housing?
Thank you for this question. I agree with Sean that affordable housing is key. It's driving a lot of the other issues in New York. And right now, everyone is for affordable housing in the abstract. But when someone says, hey, we're going to build affordable housing in your community, then people are less excited about it. And this question is right on in that right now, the guidelines around affordable housing are tied to regional median income, which in some cases is way higher than one would consider affordable in a genuine sense. So the question is, what can we do about this now? And this is one of the only silver linings of this pandemic. Really, there is not much of a silver lining, but one of the opportunities is that there is a chance for us to reconceive many of the hotels that right now are going empty, and potentially even over time, some of the commercial real estate. I heard just the other day that a hotel operator turned their keys in for their hotel because it's completely empty. They looked around and said, I've had it, and they just gave it to the lender. And now the lender's holding the hotel. The question is, how many of these hotel operators could actually be convinced to turn the keys into the city if the city were to want to assume some of the debt management? And then we could very, very quickly convert some of these hotels that right now are 80 to 90% unoccupied into affordable housing and supportive housing opportunities. Right now, the city is spending sometimes hundreds of dollars a night per room for some of these self-same hotels, which is inefficient. It's not sustainable. So this is one of the great opportunities. And then longer term, you're looking at commercial real estate, because the reality is right now, 82% of commercial real estate in Midtown is unoccupied. A lot of organizations are rethinking the way they're going to be setting up their offices. A lot of the commercial landlords are very reluctant to consider this kind of adjustment because they're waiting for the market to snap back, but they are going to find themselves in similar circumstances as that hotel operator over time. So this hopefully will allow us to repurpose some of the existing physical infrastructure of New York City to create genuine affordable housing in a way that's going to be fast and efficient. It's one of the great opportunities of this time.
I'll take two others on this question, only because we have a ton of questions that we're trying to get to. So I'll take Commissioner Garcia, and then we'll take Scott Stringer.
Thank you. We all here on this forum know that housing is critical to being able to hold down a good job, to be able to do well in school. We need to be making investments in NYCHA. It is far too long that has not happened. We need to make sure that we are doing the RAD program. This is 400,000 people that live in NYCHA and get money into apartments today. We do need to keep building across the city affordable housing. I have committed to doing 50,000 units of deeply affordable housing. So not 75% of AMI, which no one can afford. And we do have an opportunity to convert, like happened after 9/11 with office space in Lower Manhattan that got converted to residential. We will have to make changes in our zoning in Midtown to get that done, but it is absolutely doable. And we need to ensure that we are moving in that direction. We all know that housing has a healing property, that many people got sick because they were in overcrowded housing and apartments. We can make a big dent in moving this and having a paradigm shift as we go forward. So this is an opportunity, as Mr. Yang said, make lemonade out of lemons in this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Controller, and then I will allow for one additional, and then we really have to move on. So after Mr. Controller, we'll go with Dianne Morales.
Look, the reality is that under this administration, we built affordable housing. We gave away the land to revenue developers who went into communities of color. They said they would build large 30-story buildings. The mayor said, well, give us 30% affordable housing. And it turned out when I crunched the numbers, the housing wasn't affordable to the people in the communities. This goes against everything mayors are supposed to do, which is to really build and design low-income housing. Mayor LaGuardia built the first NYCHA development. And then came the Menchaca housing, one of the most successful housing programs ever devised. Koch gave back abandoned buildings to community organizations in the South Bronx. This mayor didn't do that. I would break that. And my housing plan, which I've put out way before I was running for mayor, is the following. First, I'm going to take the vacant city-owned properties. I'm going to give them to the people, to community-based organizations, not to the developers. They're going to be able to build housing with a new subsidy that will get us the AMI that we actually need. Second, we can no longer allow developers to simply build so-called as-of-right housing. That's all that luxury development you see around town, and we have to set aside 25% of that housing in communities. We have only rezoned in communities of color, and what has happened? We push people out. And what's happened is we have now an exploding homeless crisis. We have to move people, the 30% of people in homeless shelters who work, into affordable housing. And lastly, as the controller who has investigated the NYCHA debacle, and you have 15,000 members, so you know directly, I have investigated lead paint, the heating, the stairwells, the lights that are broken, the lack of repairs. We have got to move this city, everyone, to go to Washington and do something that Republican presidents and Democratic presidents have never done, which is fully fund NYCHA. And that has to be our goal, because at the end of the day, we're $40 billion short, and we can see the housing just falling apart. It breaks my heart when I go to the Ingersoll houses in Brooklyn to see across the street the big luxury development. You know what's happening. Ingersoll's falling into the background, disrepair, no one caring. And that's a story that's playing out in every housing development in this city. I will change this by putting forth the biggest, most boldest affordable housing plan, let me say, low-income housing plan this city has seen since LaGuardia.
Thank you, Mr. Controller. Last up, Ms. Morales, you can close us out, and then Jamila, next question.
Great, I'll try to keep it quick. I think the first thing that we need to do is prioritize housing for the homeless. We need to make sure that we give everybody who's living on the streets right now a place, a roof over their heads, because we can't separate public health or public safety actually from people's access to housing. The second thing we need to do is to stabilize them. So we need to provide, whether that means repurposing existing vacant spaces, providing flexibility in zoning so that we can take those spaces. We need to stabilize that population and that community so that they can also begin the path to recovery and being healthy. And the third thing we need to do is to radicalize the housing model that has been used to date. We need to move away from a speculative housing model that prioritizes developers and profits for developers and centers and prioritizes communities. That means we need to think about how we increase and expand social housing, cooperative housing, how we, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, look to establish community land trusts and community land banks and really give ownership and priority to members of the community and make sure that everyone has access to safe and affordable housing. I'll stop there.
Thank you. We're going to just keeping mindful of the time. We're going to move to the last question, and then we'll give everybody an opportunity to close out with just a 1-minute remark. This first question is for Eric Adams. It is from Lisa, who is a member of Local 1740. The New York City public school system does not provide an equal education for all. How would you address these inequities, and specifically, A, would you move towards a less segregated, more integrated student and faculty body? Or B, would you move toward equalizing education regardless of the demographics of the student body in a given school? And in either case, what would your first 3 actions be?
First, I understand a segregated school system. I was bused as a child to Bayside High School, miles away from my home, having to leave early in the day, not having the quality of education in some of the neighboring high schools. I see this over and over again. We have to reimagine education. First of all, our real investment must go to early childhood development. It's the first 1,000 days of life. And people say that education is K through career. That is wrong. It is prenatal to career. And I'm going to focus on everything from having first mothers receive doulas to understand brain development, to understand the nutritional value of the right diet while you're carrying your child. 80% of a child's brain neuron growth happens in the first 1,000 days of life. And then we're going to make sure how we treat children in schools in the first place. Quality, diversity is the key to a well-rounded education. We develop the child's full personhood. And I'm often criticized, but I don't believe and I don't embrace the agrarian calendar of 2 months off during the summertime. It doesn't mean a child must sit in a classroom, but I'm going to have one of the best remote learning systems this city has ever witnessed and this country has ever witnessed. Children could have 2 to 3 hours a day over the summer months, learning the skills they need for the future. 40% of the jobs that we are training our children for now won't be available in 20 years. So we need to start teaching them the skills that they need: critical thinking, communication, utilizing some of the new tech jobs that are available in the city as we continue to grow and expand. And so we need to reimagine education, not just to be schooling, but to be education, allowing our children to have certification as plumbers, carpenters, electricians by the time they graduate, so they can go into full employment. Even if they want to go to college at night, they can at least be gainfully employed. Here's an opportunity for us to reimagine a diverse school body in a real way, embracing technology throughout this entire city to do so. I know firsthand, as I stated before, my significant other is an amazing educator. She understands the importance of social, emotional intelligence and preparing our children for the future. And that's my focus, to reimagine education. This entire city must be part of that, including our corporate entities as well.
Thank you, Eric. Ray?
Hi, this is obviously so fundamental to who I am. Education is what got me here. It was education and the sacrifices of my mother. My 94-year-old mother-in-law is a school teacher, retired school teacher in Detroit public school system. Education is something in which I have invested for the entirety of my life. And my vision for education today is what I call cradle to career or cradle to job, which means that pre-K is an important initiative, but we need to start before pre-K. I want to go from 0 to 4, giving the appropriate child care and the appropriate caregiver mother care. And then I want to go to the end of the 3rd grade. And I want to make certain that by the end of the 3rd grade, and I want to be held accountable, every child in New York City can read. Why is that? Because between 0 and the end of the 3rd grade, the data shows that our children are learning to read. Learning to read. And I want to make sure that every New York City child can read by the end of the 3rd grade, because after that, they're reading to learn. And if they never learn to read, then the opportunity for them to learn really doesn't exist. It's been compromised. And what we're experiencing today as a COVID generation, and the system doesn't exist today to take care of those children who we've passed by. And I also want to make certain that as we move forward, beginning at the 6th grade, that we expose our children to different opportunities to understand what the career opportunities are. We can expose them to coders. They can be programmers. They can be welders. They can be botanists. They can be astronomers. They can be plumbers. Whatever it is that they choose to be, we expose them to that. So by the time they graduate, and I want to increase the graduation rate, that they can either get a job or they can go to a 2 or 4 year college. And along the way, I want to make certain that they have a job. I had a job coming up. I had several jobs. I dug footers. I laid tile. I emptied bedpans. I DC'd IVs. I built boxes in the basement of Phil's dress shop. I was a gopher for a firm, different firms. And I know what it's like to be able to get a paycheck and get your passbook savings account and go to the checking counter, the bank, and put the money in and feel good about yourself, and you get distracted. Or at least you don't get distracted, and you get distracted from trouble. It kept me out of trouble. And so I know what that's like. So it's cradle to career and cradle to job. And by the time they graduate, that they can either get a job or go to a 2 year or 4 year college. That's what we need to have in the system today, because the system today, I guess we need to reimagine it. Given that we have fallen back so far with many of our children, we need to make certain that we fix it. And that also includes making certain that as we move into a digital age, that each of our children has access to broadband. Because today, too many of them go without a tablet, without a laptop, or without access to broadband. 1.5 million families without that. And I want to invest in that, which is part of my economic plan. And oh, by the way, unless we have the economic plan, all these other plans are not going to work. We have to solve the economy.
Thank you, Ray. We're going to do Scott, Shaun, then Maya, and then we'll move to closing remarks.
Thank you, Jamila. You know, I got married late in life, and I am blessed with a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I am in the midst of a remote learning fiasco in my house. And my wife and I, as we try to navigate our jobs, are struggling with remote learning. And the reality is that we are 2 very privileged parents. We can put down any money we need for a computer or for any mental health issue. We are blessed. And the problem is that in this town, we have 100,000 kids in homeless shelters who don't have a credit card, or their parents don't have a credit card. We have too many kids in public housing without internet access. So the first thing that we're going to have to do post-pandemic is we're going to have to rearrange this education system, because the kids who did not have privileged parents are going to already fall farther and farther behind. We need to already be thinking about a foundational mental health curriculum that's going to bring closure to the children who lost their frontline worker parents. And in my case, my kids' grandparents, they still have not had that closure. There's a lot of kids who can't go to school because their parents have pre-existing health conditions and parents are risking their lives. There's been no communication at the Department of Education. I've done those investigations. I offered alternative plans as controller, and I know that we're going to have to rebuild this system for the kids who struggled during this pandemic. But look, long before the pandemic, and Ray mentioned it, 0 to 3 is everything. Bill de Blasio gets tremendous credit from me for pre-K. He did a great job and it worked, and I salute him for it. But now 0 to 3 is where we have to focus. 80% of brain development for kids is 0 to 3. So we've got to build that. But here's the difference. I don't just talk about it. 2 years ago, I developed a plan to close the childcare deserts in the city. I developed a plan for Albany to pay for a tripling of the childcare slots in the city. I talked with parents all over the city. I got legislation sponsored in Albany by Senator Jessica Ramos, who supports me, and also by Latrice Walker, who is known to many in this union. We're already on the path to 0 to 3. It's the basis of the work I've done. We can bring in 0 to 3 in the first year I'm mayor, and then we don't stop there. At the end of the day, we're going to have to equally resource our schools and classrooms. And we have to start thinking about how to move away from privilege to integration. I respect parents who kids take the Shazat in high school, and they want their kids to take that test for the right reason. But too many Black and brown kids can't even get into the specialized high schools. So what are we talking about? A mayor has to be bold and decisive. We need to change that test, and we need to do it now because we're excluding too many of our children. And that's what some of the ideas I would bring if you elect me mayor.
Thank you, Scott. Shaun?
Thanks, Jamila. We have to begin to answer this question about inequity in our schools with a broader perspective. And when I announced my campaign for mayor, the very first policy I talked about was being the first mayor in the history of the city to have a chief equity officer reporting directly to me, because every issue is an issue of equity. And this issue of inequity in our schools is connected to so many other areas. It starts with housing. Because our neighborhoods are so segregated and unequal, our schools are unequal. I'm led the strategy for President Obama to give real meaning to the Fair Housing Act, which was passed just weeks after Martin Luther King was killed. I know we're no longer subject to Donald Trump's tweets because his account has been closed, but you may remember that he was attacking Joe Biden last year for trying to quote unquote destroy the suburbs because he wanted to make sure Black and brown people could choose wherever they wanted to live. That was my work Donald Trump was attacking when I led the fair housing strategy for President Obama. I would bring that same focus and movement to New York City to make sure we make our housing fairer. And on schools specifically, there are many things we need to do. Some of them have been talked about already. I would add just a few more things though. We have successful schools that are high achieving and integrated, give Black and brown kids a chance to learn. We need to be growing those and investing in them. We also need to make sure that our teachers reflect the diversity of our city. We have 42% teachers of color in a city in a school system that's 85% kids of color. We know Black and brown kids learn better when their teachers reflect their communities. That's something we have to change. The last thing I would just say, I want to agree with Ray and Scott that early childhood is critically important. One of the biggest equity issues here, as DC 737 members know, is that we do not pay community-based and family-based childcare and early learning opportunities the same way we pay and give benefits to school-based early childhood centers. We need to fix that. As mayor, I would make sure that we have pay equity and equity in benefits and support to those community-based and family-based early learning centers as well.
Thank you. Maya, close us out.
Well, listen, when I was in my segregated, overcrowded, underfunded elementary school, and in second grade, I was at the top of my class, best in class. two highly educated parents, went to school reading ready, all those early inputs. We had Bank Street books. I was 2 years behind grade level at the top of my segregated class. Now, I am a parent who has kids who together collectively spent 15 years in the public system. I've navigated elementary school, middle school, and high school, public schools in this system. And when I co-chaired and had the great privilege of doing that with Hazel Dukes and Jose Calderon, and 42 members, including unions, parents, students, including some middle school students, all the stakeholders, teachers, principals, we had everybody at the table. And we did not walk into that room agreeing, but we did have a set of principles that guided us. And we came up with 2 separate reports, collectively over 200 pages of recommendations. And I stand by them. And I stand by them because not only were they vetted, I stand by them because as someone who's had the experience as a student and as a parent, I will tell you, we cannot have discriminatory admissions policies. They simply are wrong. We have to look at what all the research and even parents and students tell us they want. And that's innovative education. And that means that we see every single last one of our kids as exceptional. And that we design a system that enables innovation, that includes the engagement and participation in communities in developing that innovation and engagement. And as the person who had to deliver on broadband access and was proud to do it and saw where it failed, which was about vision and leadership, I will tell you it's not just about connectivity, because online learning has been demonstrated to be discriminatory in many instances. We haven't figured out how to deliver it well to Black and Latino students, and we have to admit that and focus on that. And we also have to recognize, and I've heard this from school principals, that we have to be smart about understanding, not just training our teachers, but also supporting our families and students to use the technology effectively. Not enough just to give it to them. So I say that to say I'll stand by those recommendations, but I also tell you that when you're sitting in City Hall, it's very easy to talk about what the policies will be, but the anger and the blowups come directly at you in a way they do not when you're not sitting in that hot seat. I know what it's like to be in that hot seat, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'll be principled, I'll be partnered, I'll be transparent, and I will not shy away from the fight to get an excellent education for every single one of our kids.
Thank you. So we're a little bit over time, so we're going to close out. Everybody will have 1 minute just to give closing remarks. We'll do it in reverse order this time, spice things up a little bit. So Andrew Yang, you'll go first.
Reverse alphabetical order, my favorite. Thank you, Jamila. Thank you all for everything you do. This is such a hard and tragic time for our city, and you all have been the people that have gotten us through it, and in some cases at great personal risk. This is going to be a tough time. We have to know that. I'm running for mayor because I believe I can get us through this crisis in 3 ways. Number one, I can activate higher levels of resources, either from the federal government or the corporate sector or philanthropy, to try and augment the level of resources that we have to solve the problems that we see. And number two, I believe I can accelerate our path to recovery. I can instill the confidence in some of these 60 million missing tourists and all of the people that right now are trying to figure out whether we're going to reopen our schools or our places of work. I can speed up that process. And number three, I'm going to wring the budget of everything that is not people to try and balance the budget in a way that does not affect you and yours. And I say this as someone who puts his children into your care every day. I'm going to drop my child off at that school, and I'm going to know that the people in there are there to look after them and that their livelihoods are secure.
Thank you. Maya?
Thank you. Well, let me start by saying you are the city of New York, because in addition to the workforce that keeps this city moving, you're also our residents. And you're making a decision and starting a process in which you're going to pick your next boss. And I want to tell you how I'm going to lead. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. I have a lot, and I hope you go to mywileyformayor.com and see what some of our plans are. But it's also because I will listen, learn, and partner. Because the only way we're going to do more than recover, that we're going to reimagine is if we do it together. And so a couple of things I want to just say about what we talked about. Yes, I'm a Black woman. And yes, I'm a Black woman who's never been elected to public office. And yet I'm the only candidate that has 7,000 donors, 75% of which are small donors. That's people power. And I got it even though I only declared in October. And I'm saying that because the reality is that we need a transformational leadership. And it's time we recognize what that looks like. And it looks like us. And I will also say this, that when we do this, it is going to mean that when we civilianize police functions, we're going to make sure they are respected positions and that they continue to be paid in a way that's respected. We're going to make sure that we are not going to lose our employees during this pandemic because we're going to invest in our workforce. And we are going to do it ensuring that you're not carrying the brunt of increased premiums, because we're going to bring the power of city government and the collective power of partnership with public unions as well as with other not-for-profits, other unions. And we are going to make sure that we have an effective healthcare system that's affordable and meets our needs. And yes, we're going to have more permanent affordable housing, because I know too many of you are housing insecure, but we're going to do that in partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott?
Thank you for giving all of us this opportunity tonight. And I'm here to say that we have to come out of this pandemic and open the economy differently than when we closed it. The truth is, the people who hit hardest were the communities in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, people of color who never had a chance because this virus went after people with pre-existing health conditions and disparities that have long been sanctioned by government. You see, government has always been about managing these conditions. Your union has been about solving those conditions. And that is why I've partnered with this union since I've been in the assembly, since I was borough president. But most importantly, I have partnered with you to make sure that each and every member has the retirement security they deserve. It's pretty outrageous, the low pay scale that has to be renegotiated, because you do give so much to this city, and your hope is that pension, and I have honored my commitment to you. I believe that better days are coming, but we're gonna have to do things differently. And I do think that experience matters in this race. You can't have training wheels when you're dealing with a pandemic. And I'm gonna use every part of my government experience. But most importantly, I'm a kid who grew up in Washington Heights, and the fact that I'm here with all of you today, recognizing that crisis after crisis, this union has always stood to meet the challenges that we face. I've stood there with you, and if I'm elected mayor, together, we will continue a partnership that honors your service, that does not threaten your jobs, that does not threaten the work that you do. We will be equal respected partners as we bring this city back. And I'm very honored to be here with you tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Controller. Dianne Morales.
Thanks. My backwards alphabet wasn't working for me so well that moment. Hi, everybody. So, I'm not a hero. I am not posing myself as a savior. I don't have a silver bullet to address all of the challenges that we are inevitably going to face. I am running a people-powered grassroots campaign that is intended to reflect you and all of the folks from New York City who have been pushed to the brink as a result of the current pandemic and the multiple pandemics that predated it and the failure of our leadership. My campaign has an average donation of $50 and 30% of our donors are unemployed. There is something about the message of this platform that is speaking to those who have historically been left behind and not felt represented by our city's leadership. We are at a crossroads of unprecedented times, and there are unlimited possibilities for us to radically reimagine who we can be as a city, and we can do that together. But that means not going back to normal. It means living up to our aspirations of truly becoming the greatest city in the world. It is time for us, those on the front lines, to demand a politics for all people, because those in power have always had the power. Our system is broken, but it's working exactly as it was designed to work. You don't reform an inequitable, exclusive system, you transform it. New York City needs leadership that is unapologetic about the need for us to create a new social contract that will center and elevate our working class and vulnerable communities. Anything else should not be good enough. And that's what I commit to, and that's what I promise to offer. If you want to learn more about this campaign, please check out our website at dianne.nyc, dianne.nyc, or my social media handle is Dianne, also Dianne, the number 4, NYC. I look forward to seeing you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Menchaca.
Thank you, Jamila, Shaun, Donald, and Henry, and everyone here at DC 37. Muchísimas gracias. You are the City of New York, and we have been supporting your work at the City Council as council member. I want to keep fighting for you, not just with you as members of this incredible union, but just like I'm fighting for immigrants, many of them in the district that I represent today. I have an incredible track record as someone who has fought, even when it was not politically expedient to do so. That's the courage we're going to need as COVID has exposed the dark spots of our incredible city. We need to bring resources to communities that have been impacted. That's going to take incredible courage and the breaking of the bones of this city. But we got to keep you whole. And that's my commitment, my continued commitment. And finally, I want to say this. This race is wide open. There's beautiful ideas that are being discussed, and we want to keep learning from you. So I hope that you build more of these opportunities for us to discuss, because as we get closer to the June primary, we're also going to be passing a budget in the City Council. And I want to work with you to ensure that this budget brings justice so that you can see my courage in action, my politics in action, and my commitment to all of you. Muchas gracias y buenas noches.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, Ray McGuire.
Thank you. Thank you, Labor, for all that you do. You make this city run. You make it possible. On October the 15th, I called my 94-year-old mother and I said, Mom, I'm quitting my job. She said, boy, you have lost your mind. What is going on? And so I explained to her that the city that I love is in a crisis. I said, the status quo here won't work. I said that if you look at what has happened here in this city for Black and brown people especially, but all New Yorkers, but especially Black and brown people, we've gone in reverse. We've gone in reverse. I said, Mom, I haven't been termed out. I'm not looking for promotion. I haven't worked in any administration, but I'm the only one here who has got the combination of the lived experiences, the foundation where I was raised, the sacrifices that were made, knowing what it's like not to have those lived experiences and experiences in managing and leading large budgets from the depths of the crisis and the relationships that are going to be necessary in the public forum, in government, in the private sector to bring this city together. And unless we come together, this city is going to perish. And the vision that I have is for an economy that is the largest inclusive economic recovery in the history of this city, with a jobs program that creates more jobs, safety, security, and quality of life, and education. If I look at all those three and we pull this city together, one New York, and I love New York, then I'm uniquely positioned to be able to bring this city together in ways that hasn't been brought together ever, and in ways that the New Yorkers, especially Black and brown, have not participated, notwithstanding the promises. And if you're interested in supporting me, and I look forward to your support, go to rayformayor.com or at rayformayor. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you. And thank you for the opportunity for me to make the case for how New York City will not only survive, but have a future that is as great as it's ever been. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Ms. Garcia?
Thank you. Thank you all for spending time with us this evening. I know there are a lot of Zooms, but this is going to be an incredibly important mayoral race as we get up towards June. Many of you on this forum know me. I understand the breadth of DC 37, from your engineers to your sewage treatment workers, to your clerks, to your school food personnel, you do it all. And I have been at the table with you day in and day out as we have tried to usually respond to really difficult challenges, whether or not that was Hurricane Sandy or Hurricane Irene or flooding occurring in the city of New York, and now with COVID, really stepping up to protect our neighbors and our residents. But I have a vision of how we can grow this economy and how we can reopen our cultural sector and our restaurants and all the things that we enjoy and invest in infrastructure moving forward, both our physical infrastructure as well as our tech infrastructure. But that requires us executing on what you do day in and day out, which is deliver services to the New York City residents. As I told a 5th grade class, when you think of the government, I was like, you got to think it's the people. It is your teacher. It is your crossing guard. It is the person who is giving you food, that actually is the government. And we know that when we step up as members of the government, how critical that is. So I look forward to being your next mayor, and I hope that you will go to my website to learn about other policies that might not have been discussed tonight at kgfornyc.com, kgfornyc.com. And I will continue to celebrate all that you do as I have done in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Donovan, you're up next.
Donald, thank you, Jamila, for being such great hosts tonight. To Henry, to everyone at DC 37, thank you for having us tonight for this incredible discussion of ideas and passion about this city we love. I hope you've seen that we're bringing together advocates, neighborhood leaders, so many across this city to build the campaign of ideas. And you can go to Shaun for NYC. It's right there over my left shoulder, shaunfornyc.com, and learn more about the campaign of ideas that we're building. I hope you've also heard that I've learned what it means to lead through crisis. President Obama used to say to us in moments like these that we cannot let a crisis go to waste. And I know what he meant. I know because I've seen, whether it's after 9/11, when I led housing in this city and worked with Henry to reach a landmark agreement for all of you to find decent housing. I know in the wake of the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes, when President Obama asked me to lead the nation back from that crisis, when Sandy hit our shores and he asked me to lead the federal recovery efforts there, and just 3 weeks after becoming budget director, to face the pandemic that was emerging with Ebola and Zika. And what I know about those crises is that those who are the most vulnerable before the crisis hits always get hurt the worst. That's why I was outraged, but not surprised that Black and brown communities, vulnerable communities across this city, have been hurt the worst. And our frontline essential workers like you have lost far too many, more than 100 members. That's why we need, at this moment, to ensure that we not just repair and rebuild this city, but that we reimagine it as a city that works for everyone. We cannot let this crisis pass without remaking this city as a city that works for everyone. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being heroes this past year. I look forward to working with you in the months and years to come.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mr. Borough President.
Thank you again for having me here today, and it was really good sharing ideas with my colleagues. As I mentioned, it is personal to me that what we are dealing with. We need real actionable plans for lifting working people, because I live the life of the people who are struggling right now. Like this union did for my mother, your mayor needs to stand up for workers to make sure they have good paying, dependable jobs now more than ever. The fabric of our city rips if we don't commit to that essential purpose. As mayor, I will put the force of City Hall behind those New Yorkers, starting with the city's own workforce. My fight with you did not start today. I'm not a new friend. I'm an old friend. I stood with you when we fought to civilianize the police department. I stood with you during COVID and fought with you for fair contracts. I know my school crossing guards deserve better as they protect our children. I know that we must stop hospitals from overcharging your members. I know you have amazing ideas and I want to learn from you. We can do this together. We've overcame tough times in the 70s, 2001, and 2008. But that time, the rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and we decimated the middle class. As your mayor, that won't happen again when we cycle out of COVID. Thank you.
Thank you. Henry, you want to close us out?
Yeah, briefly. First, let me thank Jamila and Donald for a great job moderating here, and thank the candidates that came. At one point, we have over 1,300 members who were there. Most of them are still there and are logging off. Let me say something to the candidates first. I believe this city has an enviable problem, which is such a talented, committed force of individuals wanting to run the city. At a time when folks are questioning government and the viability, at a time we see some that are even charging the Capitol, the fact that you have somebody in the middle of the crisis wanting to run this with such talent that you'll be running countries, it's something that is a testament to this. I will say this to one of you who will be mayor of the city of New York, will get honor endorsing or backing one of many of you in this case. There's not a single idea or a single issue that you heard today that does not touch into the city DC 37 members. And I always use this statistics. Most of our members become city workers. They have residency requirement. But of the 100,000 retired members of our city, 89% remain here after retiring. That's because they are tied to the communities. They're tied to the neighborhoods. So when you talk about education, you're not just talking about the 30,000 workers that we have in the school system or the 10,000 workers we have in early childhood education in the nonprofit sector. You're also talking about their children being educated. When you talk about hospitals, you can't talk about hospitals without talking about the 20,000 DC 37 members that work here, but also the city workers who are going to those hospitals to get services. You can't talk about parks, tourism without mentioning cultural institutions and all the museum workers who are suffering right now. So we're on the gamut. The nonprofit sector providing health and human services right now are struggling. Those are our members. Those are people who sometimes they think themselves as faceless. And so I'm going to close with this. A very good friend of mine gave me this book, City of Ambition. And it describes an ordeal coming out of fiscal crisis, one of the worst crises in the country between Roosevelt and LaGuardia, right? And it talked about rebuilding New York from the ground up with principles, even though there were political discourse from Washington to here in the city. And no, I don't get any proceeds from the book. I'm a fan of the fact that the book talks about rebuilding in New York with principles in spite of divergent political views, putting the most important thing, which is the people in New York. This union has been proud of stepping up to save the city of New York during the time of the fiscal crisis. We've done it after 9/11. We did it after Hurricane Sandy, Irene. Even this year, to prevent city workers, we reached a deal that prevented the layoffs. So not only DC 37 members, but we hold a bargaining certificate of many of them. So that makes us very proud. That will continue. Looking forward to working with all of you. Thank you so much. It was an honor to have you on our panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.